Bob gazed out the window of his spaceship as it approached Jupiter. The giant planet loomed large, its swirling storms and colorful bands of clouds a magnificent sight. At 26 years old, Bob was one of the youngest explorers to attempt a landing on Europa, Jupiter's icy moon. Ever since he was a boy reading tales of the early space age pioneers, Bob had dreamt of journeying through the solar system to unlock its secrets. As the spaceship entered orbit around Jupiter, Bob grasped the arms of his seat, barely able to contain his excitement. Through the viewport, Jupiter's turbulent clouds churned in intricate patterns of gold, brown, and red. But it was the ice-encrusted surface of Europa that captivated him. Europa had tantalized generations of astronomers with the possibility of a vast, life-sustaining ocean sealed beneath its frozen exterior. As the ship drew closer, Bob eagerly documented every detail of Europa's fractured icy landscape. He noted how the entire surface was crisscrossed with long serpentine ridges and cracks, like a baseball stitching etched across the moon's face. These double ridges were thought to be formed as Jupiter's intense gravity flexed Europa, splitting its icy shell. Bob admired the bright white scars of relatively fresh ice contrasting with older reddish bands along the ridges. He imagined circular features called lenticulae dotting the plains, theorized to be spots where the surface ocean had briefly melted through the surface before refreezing. "Take us into low orbit over the northern hemisphere," Bob told the pilot. He wanted a closer look at the Connemara Chaos region, where Europe's icy shell appeared to have partially collapsed, exposing the icy interior. They could even spot newer flows of ocean water frozen across the surface. Approaching their designated landing site near the equator, Bob carefully mapped the hazardous crevasses, threading through the local terrain. He searched for a location with ice thin enough for their specialized drill to penetrate down to the tantalizing ocean below. Skimming over the final candidate site, Bob was pleased to finally touch down safely on Europa's alien surface. Outside, Bob bounced lightly in the low gravity, marveling at an incredible vista, Jupiter dominating the black sky, the sun a distant point of light barely illuminating their position. Bob was leading the first colonization and exploration mission to Europa. His grandparents had been among the earliest colonists on Mars a century before. Bob grew up absorbing their stories of terraforming the red planet and knew Europa would be an even greater challenge. But if their theories were correct, the payoff could be immense. A habitable environment with potentially unique organisms unlike anything on Earth. His crew set up pressurized, radiation-shielded habitats in the ice, excavating corridors down into Europa's frozen crust. In these protective tunnels they would work and live for years, isolated except for occasional resupply from Earth. While his crew laser-cut into the groaning ice, Bob liked to imagine what alien creatures might exist in Europa's hidden ocean. What shrimp-like organisms swarmed around hydrothermal vents as on Earth? What strange fish might inhabit the lightless depths? He dreamt of the day when they could deploy robotic submarines to find out. Perhaps they would even discover multicellular life, indicating that organisms could evolve in Europa's sunless waters. Drill team commenced borehole operations. Bob ordered upon completing their main habitat. Finally, it punched through the saline ocean, and Bob watched tensely as the first sample siphoned up. Probing its contents would occupy them for months here, but he was eager to get started. When not working, Bob often climbed to the surface in a protective suit to gaze up at magnificent Jupiter. He felt honored to walk in the footsteps of generations before him, who gave so much to push the frontiers of knowledge. Now it was his turn to push forward into the unknown. He imagined future colonies not just on Europa, but across the Jovian moons, just as his ancestors enabled humankind's expansion across the inner solar system. During their first year on Europa, the drill periodically brought up new ocean samples to analyze. The biologists soon reported tantalizing traces of single-celled organisms, but the ecology operating in the dark depths remained a mystery. "We've only scratched the surface," Bob told his team. "Who knows what wonders await when we devise ways to explore further?" While on the surface of Europa, he spotted flashes of lightning in the turbulent atmosphere of the Great Red Spot, an ancient storm larger than Earth. He observed massive volcanic eruptions spewing sulfur and ash on Io, Jupiter's nearest moon. During his time on Europa, Bob proudly watched the colony grow. More habitats were tunneled into the ice and pressurized. Greenhouses provided fresh food. As months stretched into years, children were even born in the small underground community. Generations raised beneath the ice of Europa, the true trailblazers building a life on this remote frontier. 12 years after landing, Bob received the call from Earth he'd been eagerly awaiting. Their engineers had finally developed submarine drones capable of surviving Europa's ocean. The vehicles carried cameras and science instruments to send back data as they plunged over 500 kilometers into the dark waters. Humanity was finally going to glimpse what lay beneath. Bob and his colleagues eagerly watched the monitor as the first submersible drone splashed into the ocean. As it descended further into the blackness, its spotlights suddenly illuminated bizarre creatures swarming around hydrothermal vents. There were shrimp-like organisms, massive worms over 5 meters long, and a swarm of tiny sparkling organisms circulating in the mineral-rich waters. "Extraordinary!" Bob exclaimed. "We found life!" Gazing at the first images of this alien seascape, Bob swelled with pride at what they had accomplished. Exploring Europa had been the dream that propelled him through his youth. Now humans have a permanent foothold in the outer solar system, with an entire ocean left to explore. He knew further generations raised on Europa would continue pushing further into the unknown. Bob was ready to embark on the next stage in humanity's eternal voyage of discovery amongst the stars. The possibilities still seemed endless.